Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. On this week's episode, we bring you an Alela, Artful Provocateur, $100 budget deck tech out of Throne of Eldraine. Alela is 1, a white, a blue, and a black for a legendary creature, Faerie Warlock, with Flying Death Touch and Lifelink. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+0, and whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment spell, create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. Alela has some obvious synergies with both artifacts and enchantments. So with this deck, we're going to play out mana rocks early to get our Alela on the board as quickly as possible. We have quite a few enchantment cards that will lock down our opponent's threats, and we did include several stax effects in this build as well. This deck is focused on the enchantment matters side of Alela, which will help us make a lot of tokens, which we have several ways of pumping up, which we will use to win the game with our flying attackers. If you haven't already watched our Anjay Falconwrath $100 budget upgrades video for Commander 2019, you do still have 2 weeks to enter into the contest. I'll have a link pop up right now where you can go over to that video and enter into the contest. It's really easy to enter. All you have to do is comment, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let's get into the video. Let's start out this deck tech by talking about the mana rocks that we included in this deck. Now we want to be able to get our Alela out early, so she's generating fairy tokens early in the game. All of the mana acceleration in this deck comes from artifacts, which will also give us fairy tokens. So first up, we have Azorius Signet, 2 mana artifact that you can pay 1 and tap it to add a white and a blue to your mana pool. Then there's also Dimir and Orzhov Signet, which tap for blue-black and white-black, respectively. Then we have Soul Ring, 1 mana artifact, tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Then we have Talisman of Hierarchy, 2 colorless for an artifact, tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can tap it and add a white and a black to your mana pool and it deals 1 damage to you. Then we have Mind Stone, which is 2 colorless, and you can tap it to add a colorless, or pay 1 and tap it to sacrifice it to draw a card. We included several ways of drawing cards in this deck, as we want to keep refueling our hand so we're able to draw enchantments and artifacts and then create more tokens off of them. The first card we included is Fact or Fiction. 3 and a blue for an instant. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. This is a really great card. It makes your opponents think about which cards that they want to give you. You can play this card politically as well. Let's just say that you need to get a counterspell because one of your opponents is threatening to wipe the board and the other players at the table don't want that. You can choose one of those players and say, hey, if you give me all of these cards, I will counter that spell. And then you can use it to your advantage that way. Then we have Distant Melody. It's 3 and a blue for sorcery. Choose a creature type. Draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. Since we're generating a ton of fairies in this deck, this card can draw you a ton of cards by just naming fairy, and with all your tokens on the battlefield, this will draw you a lot of cards. Then we have Windfall, 2 and a blue for sorcery. Each player discards their hand and draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. We included a couple of enchantments that allow us to draw cards, since we will be doing a lot of damage to our opponents over the course of the game with our little flyers. The first one is Biden of Thassa. 2 blue for a legendary enchantment artifact. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, and you can pay 1 and a blue. Creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. And then we have Coastal Piracy. 2 blue for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. These work out really well with our fairy tokens, as they do have evasion, and we will be swinging in with them to get some additional damage in. We can also draw cards off of them as well. There are several enchantments that we include in this deck that give us a way of locking down an opponent's permanent. First up, we have Conclave Tribunal. 3 and a white for an enchantment. When Conclave Tribunal enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Conclave Tribunal leaves the battlefield. Then we have Ixalan's Binding. 3 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Ixalan's Binding leaves the battlefield. Your opponents can't cast spells with the same name as the exiled card. This is a really great card because you can also lock your opponents out of playing certain cards. If you exile something like a Soul Ring with this, none of your other opponents can play a Soul Ring now. Then we have Cast Out, 3 and a white for an enchantment with Flash. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Cast Out leaves the battlefield. It also has cycling for a white where you can discard this card and draw a card. Then there's Detention Sphere. 1, a white and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile target non-land permanent not named Detention Sphere and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent. When Detention Sphere leaves the battlefield, return the exile cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. Again, if you do get this on a Soul Ring and all of your opponents have one, it'll exile all of them together, which is really great. And then we have Banishing Light. 2 and a white for an enchantment. It enters the battlefield, exile a permanent until it leaves the battlefield. And then Oblivion Ring does the exact same thing. And then there's Imprisoned in the Moon. 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature, land, or planeswalker. Enchanted permanent is a colorless land with tap to add a colorless mana to your mana pool and loses all other card types and abilities. This is a really great card to put on your opponent's commander, as it will leave it sitting there as a land and they won't be able to use their commander or return it back to the command zone unless they have a bounce effect. All of these cards are really great as it does provide some interaction, and also it does fuel Alela for getting some more fairies onto the battlefield, which is exactly what we want to do with our game plan. Alela can be played as a control commander, and there are some control elements to this deck, one of which is that we added several board wipes in this deck to give us some ways of resetting the board. Since we do have a lot of ways of making tokens, we can recover very quickly, and a couple of the board wipes do have some obvious synergies with Alela. The first of which being Hour of Reckoning. 4 white for a sorcery, which has Convoke. Destroy all non-token creatures. Since we do have a lot of tokens in this deck, this is one of the best board wipes that you can draw to reset the board. Then there's Time Wipe. 2 white blue. For a sorcery, return a creature you control to its owner's hands, then destroy all creatures. You could use this to return your Alela back to your hand, wipe the board, replay Alela, and pass the turn. Then there's Merciless Eviction. 4 white and a black for a sorcery. Choose one. Exile all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or planeswalkers. This is a very great modal board wipe. Then we have Kaya's Wrath. White, black for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures. You gain life equal to the number of creatures you controlled that were destroyed this way. And then Fumigate is 3 white for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures. You gain a life for each creature destroyed this way. In addition to board wipes, we do have a control package in this deck, which will give us a lot of interaction against our opponents. And the first one we included is Dovin's Veto. 1 and a blue for an instant. This spell can't be countered and counter target non-creature spell. This is one of the better counter spells in this deck as it is uncounterable. Then there's Counterspell. Blue, counter target spell. There's Negate, which counters a target non-creature spell. Then we have Spell Stutter Sprite, which is a creature that has flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, counter target spell with converted mana cost X or less, where X is the number of fairies you control. This has obvious synergies with Alela as we are making fairy tokens whenever we play artifacts and enchantments. Then there's Muddle the Mixture, which is blue for an instant, counter target instant or sorcery spell. You can also transmute it, which means you can pay the transmute cost, discard the card, search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost as the card, and put it into your hand. Then we have Narset's Reversal, blue for an instant, copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. This is a very flexible card. It lets you steal a spell, or you could even use this on your own spell to copy it and then return it back to your hand too. Then there's a couple cards that give us some more flexibility in dealing with permanents that are already on the board. And the first being Despark. White and a black for an instant, exile target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. Then there's Generous Gift. 2 and a white for an instant, destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. And then Mortify is 1 white and a black for an instant, destroy target creature or enchantment. These are all really great ways of interacting with our opponent and getting rid of problematic permanents. There are a couple of planeswalkers that we include in this deck that have some synergy with Alela and with tokens. And the first is Sarah the Benevolent. 2 white for a legendary planeswalker. You can +2, creatures you control with flying get +1/+1 until end of turn. You can -3 to create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance, and then you can do -6. You get an emblem with, if you control a creature, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. Sarah's great with a bunch of flyers in your deck. You can give them +1/+1, and then having the ability to have worship on a planeswalker, where if you control a creature, your opponents can't reduce your life total, is extremely powerful. She also does make extra tokens as well, which is something that we're trying to do in this deck. Then there's Narset, Parter of the Veils. It's 1 blue for a legendary planeswalker. Each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn, and they can -2 to look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them, and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Narset's really great with wheel effects, as you can wheel with Narset on the board and you can draw the 7 cards, but your opponents can only draw 1. Narset is just really great on her own, slowing your opponents down and making sure that they play fair and only draw their 1 card per turn. And she does also have a powerful -2 ability where you can get a non-creature card, which is something that we want to have counter spells and interaction in our hand anyway. Let's talk about the stax effects that we included in this deck. A lot of the stax effects in Commander are very pricey, but we did include some of the ones that are more budget. And the first one is Blind Obedience. 1 and a white for an enchantment with Extort. Whenever you cast a spell, you may pay hybrid white-black. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. Artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Then there's Aura of Silence. 1 white for an enchantment. Artifact and enchantment spells your opponents cast cost 2 more to cast, and you can sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Then there's Deafening Silence. 1 white for an enchantment. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. Then there's Aven Mind Sensor. 2 and a white for a creature with flash and flying. If an opponent would search a library, that player searches the top 4 cards of that library instead. These are all really great ways to slow your opponents down, especially if you're playing in a combo matchup. This deck is slower and is not really looking to combo off or looking to win through combat damage, so we do want to have a way to slow our opponents down. Since we are playing an Enchantment Matters style with this deck, there are 2 very powerful enchantments that we included in this deck that reward us for playing that style. And the first is Sigil of the Empty Throne. It's 3 white for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying. This is a very powerful spell that's going to fill the board with even more tokens for us to take advantage of with Alela. And then we have Starfield of Nyx. It's 4 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. As long as you control 5 or more enchantments, each other non-aura enchantment you control is a creature in addition to its other types and has base power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. This will make all of your enchantments into creatures, which can put a lot of power on the board very quickly. This will turn all of those prison effects and stuff that you have sitting on the battlefield into creatures, which can put a lot of power on the board all at one time and can deal some serious damage to your opponents. Mirror Maid's just a really great card for copying extra enchantments that you may have on the battlefield. Say something like a Sigil of Empty Throne, you can cast your Mirror Maid and get an extra copy of that and create 2 4/4 angel tokens each turn. Or if your opponent has a very powerful artifact or enchantment on the board, you can take advantage of Mirror Maid and copy that as well. Since we are playing an Enchantment Matters type deck, having Enchantress cards in our deck is very powerful. Unfortunately, there's only one in our colors that we can include, and it's Mesa Enchantress. It's 1 white for a creature human druid. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may draw a card. We have a ton of enchantments in this deck. We're going to draw a ton of cards with her on the battlefield. Another really powerful card in this deck is one that is a powerful commander on her own, and it's Hannah, Ship's Navigator. It's 1 a white and a blue for a legendary creature, and you can pay 1 a white and a blue and tap her to return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. If your opponents are able to remove some of your enchantments or artifacts off the board, you can tap Hannah to put them back into your hand, and allows you to reuse some of those prison enchantments that you may have lost over the course of the game. She's a very powerful creature and a very powerful commander in her own right. Since this is primarily a token generating strategy, we did include a couple of extra ways of creating tokens whenever we play an artifact or enchantment spell. And the first is Thopter's Spy Network. It's 2 blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. And whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And then there's Mirrodin Besiege. 2 and a blue for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose Mirrodin or Phyrexian. If you choose Mirrodin, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. If you choose Phyrexian, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Then discard a card. Then if there are 15 or more artifact cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. These are really great ways of creating tokens, and they do provide some flexibility and give you some additional advantage. If you're playing a token strategy and you have a bunch of 1/1s, one of the best cards that you can include in your deck is an artifact equipment named Skullclamp. It's 1 colorless mana, and it says equipped creature gets +1/-1. When equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards, and you can equip it for 1. This will give you a way to cash in some of those fairies that you have sitting on the battlefield and get you some extra cards that you can use to interact with your opponents. The next card I want to talk about is one that gives us a lot of advantage and is easy for us to cast since we are playing in a token strategy, and it's Sephara Sky's Blade. It's 4 white for a legendary creature angel out of M20. You may pay white and tap 4 untapped creatures you control with flying rather than pay this spell's mana cost. It has flying lifelink, and other creatures you control with flying have indestructible. This will give all of your fairy tokens and Alela indestructible, and you're able to swing at will at your opponents, and you don't have to worry about blockers. Having this on the battlefield with something that allows you to draw cards when your fairies deal combat damage to a player is going to be extremely powerful, and she's a really great creature to include in this deck. Since we have a bunch of tokens in this deck, we wanted a way to pump those tokens up so that we can close out the game quicker, since having a bunch of 1/1s isn't going to win us the game that quick when you have to take 3 opponents from 40 to 0. How we're going to do this is by pumping our tokens up. First up, we have Intangible Virtue. 1 and a white for an enchantment. Creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. Then there's Force of Virtue. 2 white for an enchantment. If it's not your turn, you may exile a white card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost, and it has flash. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Then there's Glenalendra Liege. 1 hybrid black-blue, hybrid black-blue, hybrid black-blue for a creature with flying. Other blue creatures you control get +1/+1, and other black creatures you control get +1/+1. Then there's 3 other creatures that pump our flying creatures by +1/+1, and Thunderclap Wyvern, Empyrean Eagle, and Windstorm Drake. Windstorm Drake only gives +1/+0. Since we're going to have a bunch of tokens attacking each turn, there's a card that will deal our opponents a lot of extra damage each turn, and it's Throne of the God Pharaoh. It's 2 colorless mana for a legendary artifact. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. This card is going to provide a bunch of additional damage, and not only to just one opponent, it hits all of your opponents at the same time. I included an extra win con in this deck, as our main win con is really just to win by attacking with our fairies and our flyers, and the win con I included is Approach of the Second Sun. It's 6 and a white for a sorcery. If Approach from the Second Sun was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach of the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. If you're able to cast this twice, you just automatically win the game. And since we are playing a control strategy, there will be a lot of ways that you can have interaction and counter spells in your hand that make Approach of the Second Sun a really great card. Thank you so much for watching this Alela budget deck tech today. If you have any suggestions for some of the picks in this deck, or agree with or disagree with some of the choices, let us know in the comments down below. If you like this video, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, and check us out on Patreon over at patreon.com/BudgetEDH. There's a lot of different tiers for rewards over on Patreon. See you guys next time.